Now we have another wonderful speaker with us today who I just met, and she has a wonderful network of coaches and friends and has made a real impact in our community over the last 20 to 25 years. And her name is Wendy Turner-Larsen. And Wendy believes in bringing miracles into the mainstream. What a wonderful thing to believe. As an insightful psychologist, coach, facilitator, and speaker, Wendy guides women to lead from their core, where the power of the mind, the wisdom of intuition, and the possibility of the human spirit powerfully intersect to amplify impact. So please welcome to our stage, Wendy Turner-Larsen.
Very clunky shoes, and I'll pop this up a bit. Thank you so much, Ben, for your really inspiring words. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Charlene. And what better place to gather men and women together than at Powerhouse, looking out over our Saskatchewan Rough Riders. So Charlene asked me to talk about the possibility I see in leadership. So what I'm going to talk about is really in terms of amplifying leadership and accelerating leadership. So how do we accelerate all that we know about leadership? Because we have a lot of know-how, right, about leadership. I believe that we're creating a new path, that there's really something new emerging for us, and there's lots of opportunity. But how do we do that? I think we're in a time where old models of leadership may no longer keep up in order for us to create this new wave that I believe that society is craving. I really think we need something new. So I'm going to build a little bit on what Ben said and talk to you about a little bit about the neuroscience and why what Ben shared with us and what he led you through actually works. And thinking about that in terms of how do you bring that into the workplace and how do you bring your whole self to work. But a little bit about me. Really loved hearing about Ben and his background and where he's come from. But I grew up in rural Saskatchewan, yes, in the 60s and 70s, so I've lived a few decades, with 3 siblings, my parents, and lots of big and little animals around, right? Although farm life sounds very idyllic, playing outside, riding horses, picking Saskatoon berries, although as a kid, I didn't think that was so idyllic. Playing kick the can until dark. Does anyone remember that game? A few people? Great. The truth is, even with that wonderful environment around me, I was a very self-conscious kid. One of the things that I did was when friends and neighbors drove into our farmyard, I was hyper alert to that. I ran and hid. And it wasn't like when I was just 2 or 3 or 4 years old. This extended up into my early teens. And as you know, living on a farm, people drop in regularly. So I would hide until they were gone because I didn't want to be seen. My family made fun of this because they didn't know how I felt really fearful inside about being me. In my adult years, even as I was studying psychology and education in graduate school and then working and running my own business, I was really struggling with who I was. And I feel like that process of becoming who we really are is really a process through the years. I wish I knew then what I know now. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what I know now that I think has the potential to not just elevate your life, which is incredible, and Ben talked about this elevated living, but also the potential to elevate your leadership and the organizations and businesses that you work at or potentially run. And the interesting thing about this, it's not that hard. So leadership to me is connection, and first of all, connection to yourself. I love the questions that you engaged with Ben. Love to hear about your morning practices. And I firmly believe that we lead from who we are, that our connection to ourself is the first and foremost and the most important place to start with in terms of your work and in terms of your leadership. So what Ben shared about is actually neuroscience. It's the science of the brain. And sometimes people find this really interesting, that the reason this works when you're focusing on positivity, particularly starting your day with that, The reason this works is because your brain and your body gets flooded with all these feel-good hormones and brain chemistry, like oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Didn't you feel better right after that little guided visualization, with Ben? So think about the impact if you do that every day. Think about the impact if you really pull in those good, feel-good feelings. The other thing that is really interesting that happens, in addition to the brain chemistry changing and flooding your body, is you begin to create new neural pathways. So I grew up on a farm, and I was used to driving in ruts on the road. So our old neural pathways are like ruts in the road. You create them by worrying, by complaining, by thinking negative about yourself, and so those neural pathways create that rut, and whenever you have a situation that you think about or feel bad about, boom, you're right down into those old neural pathways. And I don't know about you, but what used to happen to me was it would cycle me down into self-doubt, more negativity, feeling worse and worse, worrying more. So just this practice of positivity, as I said, creates those new neural pathways. When you do it repeatedly, when you think about a situation, it's more likely you're going to go into the new neural pathways, like ruts in a road. So in my work as a psychologist, leadership brain coach, and some of the training that I do for women and women in leadership, this is exactly what we work on with the women. And what they notice is that the magic is in the repetition, and the magic is at feeling the emotion, just like Ben said. This is why you can create elevated living. Positivity rewires your brain. And if you're interested in this, there's fabulous books out there. Not only will you be happier, but many of my clients talk about how quiet their mind becomes, less of the squirrel. I don't mean this, but less of the busy squirrel that a lot of people talk about. This is science. What you think, you are. So when you think about your work and leadership, consider how harnessing the power of your mind would not only make you feel better, but what is possible in terms of your leadership skills and work skills if your mind was calm, if your mind was free to create, to strategize, to plan inspired actions. And then, what if everyone where you worked knew and practiced what I call these brain practices? A few years ago, I worked with 20 women in an organization. And these 20 women made up less than 1/3 of the workforce. So we did some coaching, and we did some group work and some training. But they regularly practiced what Ben talked about, just that intention in the morning, gratitude, positivity. And not only did they change as individuals, where their performance improved because they were confident and more engaged, they started to have an incredible impact on the rest of the organization. So they began to share with me how positivity spilled over onto others, how they would use this just for fun as an experiment. That if somebody was kind of grumpy or crabby, that they exuded a little bit more positivity. They noticed that they could shift moods in other people, and that's actually known as mirror neurons. What you feel gets mirrored in other people, what they feel gets mirrored back to you, and that's the power of connection with other people. So one of the other things that was really important was they talked about saving a lot of time that was usually wasted on gossiping and complaining, which is actually very detrimental to your brain. I'm not kidding you. This all occurred because of their regular daily practice of positivity. I'm sure they missed some days, and they feel bad about that. And I'm like, just reframe. It's okay. So if this can change you, this can change organizations, this can change the way you lead. So the first part of leadership that I believe is connection to yourself, which is incredibly important. The next piece I want to talk to you about is something not talked about typically in leadership circles or at leadership conferences, and that is a deeper connection to your inner spirit. Candace talked about that. I forget her exact words, but just really living from that energy. But this is your innermost being, your spirit within, perhaps the divine or God within. But it makes sense to me that if we really want to lead in a new way and really elevate and accelerate all the knowledge we have about leadership, to me it makes sense to lead from our whole selves and access our inner being, our inner place of spirit. I believe that this is where our deepest passion and purpose resides. That sometimes I think a lot of us are sort of accidentally accessing that, but if we don't really integrate that and pull from that, I think what can happen is we force ourselves on paths, even work or leadership that is not us. This is also the place from which intuition rises. And these three things, purpose, passion, intuition, I think that that's what our inspired action comes from. So most of my life journey has included spirituality, but it's not something like this that I've really brought forward into my work. But I have started to inquire with my clients about, their inner connection with self, and what do they call God, or if they believe in God at all. It doesn't really matter, but there is this inner connection to ourselves. When I was a young adult, I studied theology, and I actually became a pastor. Talk about a world where women aren't really elevated, so there was a lot that I learned at that time. But I think really what I was doing was I was searching for this inner connection that I'm trying to share with you about today. For me and for others who explore this connection within, not really sure always how it happens, but through intentional prayer, meditation, journaling, and then listening to your inner intuition, listening to that still small voice. But I think in addition to what happens, other than our purpose and passion, I think that creates the wholeness of who we are. We are human beings. We're not just a mind and a body. We're a mind, body, and spirit. So most of you have probably heard of Carl Jung, and we mostly know him as one of the fathers of modern psychology. So I studied psychology, but I never heard this about Carl Jung, that he was also exploring the intersection of spirituality and science, spirituality and psychology. Felt like there was something there, and I feel like that's some of the cutting edge ways, some of the cutting edge movement that we can bring into leadership. So when I inquire with leaders about their inner world, as I said, it's not really explored in terms of their role or in terms of leadership, but people are interested. The women that I talk to are interested. And what's also interesting, now that I started to ask people about intuition, everybody has a story, but they minimize their intuition. So one leader shared with me this: I know I have intuition, and I've had a strong knowing for a long time exactly what I am to do as service. I often get the exact steps to do this and how to make it happen. One of my colleagues, who is an expert in emotional intelligence, she's written books on it, she travels internationally speaking about EQ, she said this: I don't know where my creativity and my ideas come from. All I know is I need to pay attention. I think that's the powerful piece, the noticing, the paying attention. But what I found also interesting for these two women was this was not really in their conscious awareness that they were connecting to and listening to that inner voice. But I think that's exactly what they were doing. So what if we could explore this further? Validate experiences like that to deepen and trust our inner knowing. Imagine the powerful action that could rise with more ease. I liked what Ben said, one of the words was ease and living with ease. So my question is, how do we explore this interconnection with spirit within the context of leadership? So there's not a lot of time to explain how to do this, but I think intention is powerful. And you could start by just having the intention to explore your inner wisdom of intuition. What I hear lots from people is, oh, you have intuition, but I don't. We all have it. And people will say, well, I don't hear. I think if we just have that intention to explore this and not have to get it right or perfect, that it's a little bit of an experiment. And watch what begins to emerge. Watch for the connections. Watch for the synchronicities. What we notice shows up more. Journal, meditate, experiment with listening within, and notice then what begins to happen in your work or your leadership. So I've said that leadership is connection. Starts with connection to yourself, connection to your inner spirit, the divine within, and then connection to others. Alignment happens from the inner place of connectedness, and then from your alignment to yourself, you connect with others from who you really are and from your whole self. Catherine talked a little bit about that, leading from your whole self. She also talked about connection to others, that fierce dialogue, that stream of meaning, which is powerful. And that's the mirror neurons again. What you are feeling, you reflect in others, and they reflect that back to you. You can shift yourself, and you can shift others. So as I wrap up, we know a lot about leadership strategies, what to do, leadership competencies, but for me, I have 3 master's degrees, and I want to say that it's not been my know-how and my knowledge and years of education that got me to where I am today. It helped, because sometimes people won't hire you unless, you have a certification, right? But it was only when I began to explore the power of the mind and how I could shift my beliefs about myself and this positivity that my self-consciousness, remember as a young kid and teenager, I ran away from people. I didn't want to be seen. I was not comfortable with who I was at all. And then my connection and exploration of my inner world and connection to the divine. That's what changed things for me. So in my upcoming book, which is a culmination of a lot of this that I've talked with you about today, my life work, which working on ourselves does feel like work sometimes, but both personally and professionally, I share more about how to become who you really are so you can lead from your whole self and lead from that connection within. So as you think about what I've just talked about, imagine as you access within all that you are, your mind, your spirit, your intuitive wisdom, how could that amplify all that you already know about leadership? We need a new path in leadership. We have a lot of know-how. How can we amplify that? We need a new way of being and doing. So what action can you take to harness the power of your mind, access your intuition, so you can lead from all that you are? Thank you.